What's up, movie friends? Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost podcast.
Episode 26. Today, we're going to do an actor spotlight on Natalie Portman. And we felt Natalie was the next great choice to do an actor spotlight on, not only because she's incredibly talented and intelligent, but she's been making great films since she was a kid and has dabbled in all genres, showcasing a wide range of emotions and skills as an actor.
Yeah, she has an eclectic career, and she's one of those rare child actors that go from giving an iconic child performance to going on to becoming an incredible actor in their own right as adults, like someone like Christian Bale.
Yeah, I don't even think she's 40 yet, but she seems like she's been acting forever, and she's been in movies since I was a little kid and right before when I was a child.
She makes me feel like a piece of shit for not accomplishing anything because she's only 9 years older than us.
Yeah, she's a very accomplished person. She's been nominated for 3 Oscars. She won 1 for Black Swan, which she also won Golden Globe and BAFTA for.
She actually won, I think, 38 awards for Black Swan. The third most wins for her performance ever.
Yeah, I think Helen Mirren is number 1 with the most awards for one performance.
40.
Yeah, which is absurd.
It's crazy.
Before we get started, if you like our content and our podcast and you want to help support us, the best thing you can do is share our podcast, either the YouTube videos or the audio versions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a comment, hit the notification bell for new episodes. We're growing mostly word of mouth, so please let your friends and family members know about the show. Your movie friends, we know you got them. Leaving a 5-star review is very helpful for us to get seen by new people on the podcast apps, especially when you leave a written review. We don't just a quick
Type
one.
it up.
A sentence is all you have to do. Thank you so much to everyone who's done it. We also have a Patreon now. You can check us out there and support us monthly, and you get unique perks like a personalized video sent to you from us, sneak peeks at episodes and behind-the-scenes stuff. So our top-tier patrons also get a monthly shout-out, so check that out if you want to help out. We got new tables. We're not using the kitchen tables anymore for the sets. We got some real stuff going on, so we're investing into the podcast to make it as good as possible. And thank you so much for the support, but now let's get into the episode. There will be some spoilers, obviously, when we talk about Natalie Portman and her filmography, but we won't spoil things too much.
We'll try.
And Natalie Portman was born in 1981 in Jerusalem, Israel, and has dual citizenship with Israel and America. Natalie's family relocated to Washington, D.C. in her youth, then to various parts of New England during her childhood. Natalie was a very creative child and began dancing ballet at age 4. And at age 10, a Revlon agent spotted her and asked her to be a model for their makeup line, but she turned it down and actually used it as leverage to get an acting agent, which led to landing a role in the off-Broadway musical Ruthless.
She was discovered in a pizza shop.
Yeah. Hopefully that agent was a woman. That would be awkward. At age 11, Natalie auditioned for Leon the Professional and got the leading role as Matilda. And Natalie isn't the typical celebrity or A-list actor. Besides obviously being a very stunning and talented woman, she graduated with a psychology degree from Harvard University, has 2 papers published in scientific journals. She's a massive supporter of so many amazing causes like Finca, which is an anti-poverty organization, and is incredibly vocal about gender equality.
When Aaron Sorkin was writing The Social Network, he spoke with Natalie Portman to get advice about it because she was actually attending Harvard at the same time as Zuckerberg and Saverin. And so she was part of the Harvard community that had the first ever Facebook accounts. So she gave him a lot of advice about what the school was like at that time of Zuckerberg's creation of the website.
Yeah, so Sorkin got like a really authentic interview and information from her. I'm sure he interviewed other people that went to Harvard too, but it's pretty cool that she went there and was classmates with them and the Winklevoss twins.
Yeah.
Natalie, like we said, she's a very striking, beautiful woman. She's incredibly photogenic, and the camera just loves her every time I watch a movie with her in it. Every shot, every angle, you can't light her wrong. You can't take your eyes off her. She's also self-taught in acting. She never really took acting classes or went to acting school. She uses her own personal techniques to create her characters and uses empathy as a tool to craft her complexities on camera.
The thing with acting is, to a certain extent, you can teach it, but there is a huge area that you have to be naturally gifted at the craft itself to be able to excel at it. And some people, like I said, Christian Bale is similar, where he's self-taught and started as a kid, where from a very early age, they were able to emote and carry out these complex scenes as actors when people like you and I were just like playing video games and riding around on our bicycles. So it's something that she has, this talent that can't be taught. And she's always been able to emote in an extreme way ever since she was a kid, especially with Leon. You can see it how well she performs the emotional scenes in that movie. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're not talking about the people who like think they can be actors because I've been acting my whole life.
Yeah.
Like if you ever work in production or in casting, you'll get that a lot. People are like, I've been acting my whole life, I could do this. But there's, like you said, there's a different characteristic between very talented natural actors who can just kind of make their living off of it and just take it to a new level.
Yeah, and then there's also the child actors that they become kind of nobodies as they get older because they had a little bit of talent as kids, but they were never able to develop it. But they still didn't have the same caliber of talent as someone like Natalie Portman had as a kid.
Yeah, and
I would say like someone like Anna Paquin was the same because she won an Oscar when she was a kid, and like Christian Bale.
I mean, Haley Joel Osment.
Yeah.
What happened to that kid?
Exactly. Like so they could do it as kids, but it's rare to transition from successful child actor to successful adult actor.
Yeah, you could probably attribute a lot of that to her intense work ethic and the amount of time she puts into her roles. Also, she's, again, very intelligent woman. She has an IQ of, I think, 140. So I'm sure that comes into effect in terms of, like, what she wants to do and the way she approaches her craft and acting and, like, looking long-term at her long-term goals.
That's probably why she wanted to become a psych major, because she was probably fascinated in behavior and wanted to learn more about it, which probably helps her with her craft.
Just quick trivia, Natalie's fluent in English and Hebrew since she was born in Jerusalem, plus she has studied French, German, Japanese, Arabic, and Spanish, so she's dabbled in a lot of languages and is an avid learner of them.
And she also wrote and directed and starred in a foreign film.
Another fun fact, she'd never seen a Star Wars movie before she got cast as Padme Amidala, and she admitted that. But and she also had to miss the premiere of Phantom Menace because she was studying for high school exams because she was still a teenager.
Meteoric success from such a young age. She was even actually cast as Juliet in Luc Besson's Romeo and Juliet, which eventually was played by Claire Danes. And she and DiCaprio actually filmed several scenes together, but the executives decided to cut her loose from the production because she was so young. It didn't feel right to see DiCaprio, who was like 17 at the time, to have these romantic, intimate scenes with like a 13-year-old.
Yeah, and she still looks very young. She looked very young until, like, I would say till she's like 30. She still looked like a teenager. And she's also very petite. She's like 5'2", 5'3", and often gets mistaken as like a kid at airports and stuff like that. There's funny stories about that.
And she also spent decades training her voice to deepen it because she always had a high-pitched childlike voice. And so she's probably still training to keep it deep and keep it more adultish rather than a childlike voice,
which she ironically had to try to reverse during the filming of Black Swan, which we'll get into later on during her filmography.
She was nearly cast as Natasha Romanoff in the Avengers.
Oh, no way.
And eventually, because they wanted Emily Blunt first, and then they wanted Natalie Portman, and then they also wanted ScarJo, and ScarJo is the one who ended up working out for it. But they had a lot of interest in Natalie Portman.
Yeah, she would have been great, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the filmography of the very talented Natalie Portman. Natalie's acting career started in 1994 with Leon the Professional, which was the first film she was ever in, written and directed by Luc Besson. This is a very good director. His movies can be hit or miss, but he's made some phenomenal films, iconic films like The Fifth Element, which we all loved and is super fun. And Leon is a very early film in his filmography. And it's about after a family is murdered, a 12-year-old named Matilda is taken in by a professional assassin named Leon, played by Jean Reno. The two build an unusual relationship, and she soon becomes his protege in the art of killing.
This movie, Matilda and Leon, are very iconic characters, and this film was moderately successful when it came out, but it has become a cult classic. I mean, you got a sticker of it right there on your computer, and especially the iconic looks of the characters. This is a popular Halloween costume, like a couple's costume. Like someone will dress up as Leon and someone will dress up as Matilda. And so I think people really gravitated towards the looks of these characters very much.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it, this came out in 1994, same year that Pulp Fiction came out in 1994, and Matilda and Mia Wallace have kind of a very similar look, like that short, dark hair, like jet black hair, trimmed at the same length, the bangs. And so, like you just said, they're both very iconic, like cultural, like posters, stickers. You'll see them everywhere still. Like you said, Halloween costumes. And so I see a lot of similarities between Mia Wallace and Matilda.
This movie can be very serious and dark at times, but it also has a lot of fun qualities to it, and it's very funny. The relationship between Matilda and Leon can be very, very funny, but also awkward and strangely intimate at times. But all in all, it's a lot of fun, and Portman is extremely charming in this. From her first scene on, she just is a natural in front of the camera, and you can't take your eyes off of her. and she's just a natural born performer.
Yeah, she showed immense levels of maturity in this role, especially the shot where she's carrying the groceries through the apartment building after her family's been murdered, and she's trying to make it seem like she's not part of the family, and she goes to Leon's door and is knocking on the door trying to get him to come in, and she's just weeping but trying to be as quiet as possible, just staring at the door, hoping it opens, and it's just like emotional as hell, and like the control she has over her body, emotions, and her tears and everything it's insane for an 11-year-old.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying about like that natural ability to emote, which so few people can do after training for years, but she was just able to do it at such a young age. It's pretty amazing. And also, Matilda she reminds me of Hit Girl in Kick-Ass, where it's just fun watching like a little girl with a gun shooting up people.
It's ironic.
The ironic, contradictory nature of it. It's just so ridiculous, but it's fun to watch.
Yeah, and although it is a violent movie, the thing with Natalie that I really respect about her a lot is she cares a lot about her image and the way she's perceived by people in terms of being a proper role model for other girls, other kids out there. And something about Matilda in this film is she's always chain smoking cigarettes in the script. She's constantly smoking butts. But her and her parents had an issue with the violence. They wanted to tone down the violence a little bit, and also the only way they'd sign on board for the film is Matilda would never be seen smoking and taking a drag from the cigarette, but always there'd be a cigarette in her hand or a cigarette that she lights, but she'd never actually be seen smoking the cigarette.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
And I think that this is a really wise decision for Natalie because she's aware of her impact, even at such a young age, on other kids, and she knows that smoking isn't a good thing to do as a child, and when you're an adult you can make your own decisions and everything, and she knows violence isn't good. So I think that's something that she's constantly been aware of throughout her whole career, taking on specific roles or approaching roles specifically, her personal life in a very mature fashion.
Oh, that's a good point. You're right. She never actually takes an actual drag of a cigarette. What's really cool about this movie is that Leon is actually not the first time this character was played by Jean Reno and filmed by Besson. This character appears in Besson's earlier film La Femme Nikita, and he shows up in the second half of the film. And after making the film, Besson loved the character so much, he felt like he underused the character in that film. And so he wrote this entire movie just for that character to get like a second shot at portraying this character.
I love when you give me movie facts I've never heard. Because, man, it's so fun because I didn't know that at all. Another kind of similar fact to that is this movie, it's obviously a cult classic, and people always wanted a sequel to this. And Besson wrote a script called Matilda, which he wanted to make into a sequel with Natalie Portman obviously reprising her role. I think he wrote it and wanted to do it in like 2005. But it never ended up going through. It was always just chilling on his shelf, and like no studio produced it, and he was just busy with other projects, and so was she, especially when she was doing Star Wars for 6-7 years. And then he eventually never got to make it, but he did change the script and used it for the film Colombiana, which starred Zoe Saldana. So Zoe Saldana plays a cleaner in Colombiana, which is what Leon is and what he trains Matilda to become, as a cleaner.
Gotcha. That would have been cool as Natalie Portman, but yeah, Colombiana is a pretty cool movie.
Yeah, it's cool, but I would have loved to see her just reprise Matilda because it's a fun character.
Yeah. This film, I'm not sure if it ages quite as well as we would want it to because of it is awkward. There is a level of intimacy between Leon and Matilda, despite the huge age difference. And it's cute at times and funny at times, but also it can be a little intimate at times. And Besson actually filmed more intimate scenes for the European version of the film, and they'd cut them out for the American version. And so they allude to it more so in the director's cut. It has a very similar structure to Lolita, the famous novel which Kubrick made in the 60s, of this older man who can't help but be allured by a young girl.
And yeah, the French version's a little different. The American version, Leon is basically just mostly a father figure, keeps it at that level, although Matilda kind of just falls in love with her in the sense that, like, you know, most girls when they grow up, the first person they love is their father. And that's a very common thing in families.
But also there could be this thing where Leon could maybe be like seeing like a future with her when she gets older. You know what I mean?
Possibly.
That could be a possible thing that's going on in his head. We don't really understand too much of how he's thinking, but that's what I get a sense of. Like, he's not like grooming her, but like he can be her protector, and then when she becomes an adult, maybe they can establish a more intimate relationship.
Yes, movie's almost 30 years old. It's a different period in time.
Yeah.
Things were different back then, so you have to take that into account when you watch films like this, especially films that are either European or French. It's totally different cultures.
Yeah. Portman, at such a young age, she had to go into scenes with one of the greatest actors of our generation, Gary Oldman, and she just stands up to him no problem, and she's able to stand her ground with a heavyweight actor like this.
Seriously, that bathroom scene where she was coming in to kill him and he knows about it, like it's like a 6-minute scene with her, them two in the bathroom, and he's gonna kill her, and it's just like so intense, and you can't believe this 11-year-old is keeping up with Gary Oldman in his prime.
Yeah, and this is one of Gary Oldman's most ridiculous, unhinged performances, and the fact that she can balance out his acting with her own is just really impressive.
And this is just a great film. It's a gem from the 90s. It's one of Besson's best. It might be his best. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend checking it out, especially if you're a fan of his films and a fan of Natalie Portman, because it's very fun and it's a really interesting story.
Yeah, it's a very fun movie, and then it also gets very emotional. You really care for these characters, and when Leon sacrifices himself to save her, it's a very emotional scene, and you really feel for them, and you feel like they have this connection in this new relationship, and they both found someone they could finally connect with on a personal level, and it only lasted a short while, which is kind of tragic, but it ended up saving Matilda's life, and also ended saving up Leon's life, because he tells her that because of her, he like learned how to love again, learned how to feel again. So it's very fun and a little tongue-in-cheek at times, but also very deep.
All right, let's move on briefly to 1995. The next really movie that Natalie was in, big movie, was Heat. It's a legendary heist movie with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. De Niro's the thief, Pacino's the cop, and Natalie plays Al Pacino's stepdaughter in Heat. And this is an incredible film by Michael Mann, possibly the best heist movie ever. We won't get into the film itself too much because we'll dedicate this to an episode, do a heist episode.
Fuck yeah.
But yeah, easily one of the best shootouts I've ever seen on camera. Natalie's natural talents got her cast in two not the first movie big, but popular movies. Like we said, Leon became a cult classic, and Heat was one of the biggest films of the year. And she's starring in a movie with Pacino and De Niro, who at the time, it was the 90s, are the biggest stars in the world.
Yeah.
And Natalie's character is on an emotional roller coaster due to the dysfunction in her family, and she has a very intense suicide scene towards the end of the film. She doesn't have a ton of on-screen time, but acting with Pacino as a teenager is quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, with them two, she only has like maybe 10 minutes of screen time, but when her and Pacino are going back and forth, you can just see like she can compete with these huge actors. And also, she plays an incredibly convincing dead, lifeless body in this movie.
Yeah, in the tub.
Well, yeah, after she nearly kills herself, she's completely limp, and it's like it looked believable as hell.
Good actor.
Yeah.
Pretend like you're dead, Natalie. She's like, all right. Not that dead, Jesus.
But she added a lot of heart, not a lot, but for the minimal screen time she had, she added emotion and heart to Pacino's storyline and an emotional connection for him. Yeah,
she kind of took that troubled teenage character that we see in a lot of films and a lot of dysfunctional families and just brought more emotion to it than you'd really ever seen on camera. Some typical performances like that.
Yeah, and just like Leon in this film, because in her first early scenes, she's with Pacino and a couple of the other cops, and they're all pretty big actors in their own right. But she just has like, ever since she was young, she seems so comfortable in front of the camera. You know what I mean? How many young people would have been like so nervous they couldn't even breathe in that scene? But she's sitting in a car with Pacino. And yeah, you included.
I would have been definitely shitting my pants.
Yeah, but she's sitting in a car with Pacino, like, and it seems like she's like it's like not even bothering her at all. Like she couldn't care less about it, which is why I think that having that comfort gives her the ability to be such a good performer.
If you've never seen Heat, you got to watch it ASAP. Michael Mann's awesome. It's not just an action movie, intense drama,
it's a crime epic.
Acting. Check it out ASAP. You will not regret it. Natalie then went on to do some comedies and romantic dramas like Everyone Says I Love You and Anywhere But Here, and even had a part in Mars Attacks. She played the president's daughter, and the president was played by Jack Nicholson. And I don't know how this movie got the cast it got. Obviously, Tim Burton. Yeah, but like it's such a weird... and fun cult classic movie that you can't help but love it. If you've never seen it, I've seen it like 5 times. I don't know why.
I remember we watched it a lot when we were kids, maybe because our brothers loved it.
It was always on TV.
Yeah, but we were very young when it came out. And honestly, I didn't even know it was Natalie Portman until like I was in my late teens. And I was like, wait, that's Natalie
I
Portman in
barely
Mars
even knew who
Attacks?
Jack Nicholson was when it was out.
Yeah, exactly.
I was
We
a
were
little kid.
Yeah, we were just like, oh, that's the president in Mars Attacks.
I haven't seen this in like since the 90s,
Yeah.
but like I can still remember like everything about it vividly.
Yeah, Mars Attacks is probably one of the most ridiculous sci-fi movies ever made. I think that and what's it called? Starship Troopers are
Yeah.
just like ridiculous, tongue-in-cheek, black comedy
But
sci-fi
they're not
movies.
bad. They're like
Yeah.
a fun, like chilling with your friends night movie.
Yeah, because Tim Burton's a very smart director. He didn't make this movie to win an Oscar. You know what I mean? He made it to just make a fun movie that's just like this ridiculous story about aliens taking over the Earth.
Yeah, and half the time it's almost like a parody on comedies. It's almost like the vibe is like Airplane in those movies too,
Yeah.
and Naked Gun.
Yeah.
A little bit, but it's just it's a really good time.
And Portman doesn't have much to do, and I mean, she has this storyline with Lucas Haas's character, and then with her father and mother. But all in all, she's a side character, but I mean, she's getting in movies.
She's like 15 at the time.
Yeah, this is a big movie that came out. I think there was like an $80 million budget, so it's a big budget movie. So she's getting her foot in the door with this.
Yeah. And then she also had a cameo as herself in Zoolander.
I love that cameo.
Like on the red carpet, talking about how like she subtly is like wants to date Derek Zoolander.
She's like, if he's single, I mean, if he's interested, I mean, did he say anything?
Yeah, she's like, it's like he's like too hot. And then Natalie hit it huge, getting cast as Padme/Princess Amidala, Queen Amidala, in the new Star Wars reboot, The Phantom Menace Trilogy. Mm-hmm. And this was in 1999. And although The Phantom Menace was critically disliked, this film still made almost $1 billion at the box office, which was absurd in 1999. And it turned Natalie into an overnight global star.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time anyone's seen a Star Wars movie in 20 years, so it had so much built up around it, and she's one of the leads. And I'm sure they must have auditioned thousands of kids for this, because I think she was like 16 or 17 when she filmed it. I would say that of the 3 Star Wars films that she's in, this is probably her best story arc and character role in all 3 films.
Absolutely, because they kind of did to Queen Amidala and Padme what they did with Finn in the newer trilogy. I mean, Finn's a great character in the first one.
Yeah.
He's got a lot to do, great plot line.
He's holding the lightsaber at the end.
Tons of character development, and you think, wow, they're going to do so much with Finn with the other 2 movies. And then his character, they kind of just fizzle him out, and he's not as important, really, as Rey and Poe, and then Adam Driver, freaking Kylo Ren, anger management. So, like, as Finn fizzles out towards the end of the trilogy, same thing with Padme. Even though she's a very complex character and has a lot to do in, like, the books and the TV shows.
In the first movie.
And the lore. And, yeah, in the first movie, she's kicking ass and holding guns and shooting guns and everything. Yeah. She kind of just fizzles out towards the 3rd movie, where she's kind of just there to be, like, Anakin's love interest. And obviously she's has to give birth to the twins, which is part of her story arc. But yeah. I feel like they could have done a lot more interesting things with Padme, made her more integral to the story. And it seems like they sacrificed her plots and her character development for Anakin's character development.
Yeah, she lost her impact on the story by Revenge of the Sith completely. But let's talk about the first one for a bit, because I think it's a really strong character in the film, because she plays pretty much 2 roles. She plays Queen Amidala and she plays Padme.
I know, when the twist came that she was actually Padme, it was Queen Amidala, I was like, oh my god, no way.
Really cool fact is that when she was using the deceptive practice, when she was playing one of Queen Amidala's so-called servants, Keira Knightley was playing Queen Amidala. And so when Padme is not covered in makeup and she's just one of the people on the side, it's always Keira Knightley in the makeup with crazy hair pretending to be the queen. And they look so much alike already, but when they had the makeup on, their own parents couldn't even tell them apart.
Yeah. They're very similar looking people.
Yeah. Padme has a lot to do in this one, and even in the second one. Politically, she has a lot of power within the Republic. First as the queen, and then when she becomes a senator in the second one. So she has a lot to do in the first one. She has a lot of responsibility,
a lot of impact on the galaxy.
Yeah, because she's the leader of an entire planet, and so her decisions are always putting her people first. What's best for her planet, and she's a very good leader and seems to always make the right decisions.
Yeah, Padme, you can't help but love her in the Phantom Menace, and she's one of the best parts of the movie. And yeah, she's complex in that film too. And Natalie actually didn't even actively pursue Star Wars. She got offered the part after meeting with George Lucas and still took a few weeks to decide if she wanted to take the role or not. And again, she was still a teenager. I think she was 14 when she had the meeting, and they started filming when she was like 16 or 17. And when you're in your teens and you've been in movies, but you also want to live like a teenager and have somewhat of a normal life. And so it's a big decision to sacrifice, your teenage years and going into your young adult life, because you're going to work on 3 major blockbuster films in the next 6 years, which are going to take up pretty much most of your time.
Yeah.
And so she ended up doing it, and it worked out. I think she's perfect for the role, of course.
Yeah, she's great, and she obviously, like we said earlier, she's extremely striking looking, and the camera loves her. And combining that with her ability to really act and emote is just a winning. It's a knockout combination for an actor.
Yeah, and Amidala and Padme, I think, was a really important role because you're rebooting the trilogy from the original Star Wars, which was so iconic. And just like they did with the Star Wars Force Awakens trilogy, Lucasfilms used kind of a similar character format from the original Star Wars trilogy, where you have the 2 guy leads as well as a female lead, and one of the guys is comic relief almost, and there's a Jedi or almost Jedi, as well as people who are strong with the Force.
The kid who grows up on a desert planet.
Yeah, so
there's a princess.
If anyone doesn't realize, Star Wars is the same trilogy every time. But also, this is the first time they rebooted it, and Princess Leia is such an iconic character that they kind of had to get it right. They had to try to at least match what Leia was in terms of to the lore and how important of a character she was to everybody who was a fan of Star Wars. And I think they did a great job in the first one with Padme.
Yeah, and when she's a diplomat and when she is the queen, Lucas digitally enhanced her voice to really deepen it. So that's why when she's speaking as the queen, her voice is so deep and powerful.
Yeah, and they actually spent a lot of time, her and Lucas, developing the accent and dialect of Padme, because they wanted to sound very classical Hollywood, starlets like Audrey Hepburn and Lauren Bacall. So that's why Queen Amidala has this very distinct, noble sounding voice, and it's a cross between those starlets and some sort of a classical British accent. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you can see the side of her that's a sweet young woman who always wants to do the right thing, and then when she meets Anakin, they share a few scenes of it's not quite like Leon and Matilda, but they're also Lucas sprinkled little bits of hinting at them having a personal and intimate connection. But although it can be pretty awkward at times.
Yeah, when Anakin's the little kid, he's 8 years old.
Yeah, there's some awkward dialogue between them.
At least it's not as bad as Blank Check.
That's true. Oh my God, Blank Check.
But however, despite the box office, Phantom Menace was initially a disappointment, and still is, because we were talking about this earlier. Picture being a massive fan of the original Star Wars trilogy, which were adult films and kid films. There are a lot of mature themes in it, and they were kind of just seemed like an older teenage adult audience. And then for 20 years you're waiting for the sequels to come out. They're gonna reboot, and you're very excited, and then you go and you see the Star Wars, the new trilogy, and they kind of just toned it down to make it for kids. The audience was 8-9-year-old kids. They're trying to sell toys. And it's not that there's still not great movies, and you still have great lightsaber battles and lots of interesting dialogue and story arcs, but still they kind of toned it down, made it very family friendly, and really, again, marketing towards kids.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest downside, which led to that, was deciding to portray Anakin as a really young kid, as an 8-year-old. I think that if Anakin was a young teenager, maybe 14, 15, it probably would have worked out a little bit better. But since he was so young, they formed the film around that audience, young kids. So I think the whole pod racing plot was literally just to sell video games and toys, which is why they put the pod racing in.
And Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks is only entertaining people who are under 11 years old. Yeah. No adults like Jar Jar Binks, man.
Yeah, and the thing is, if they had made the Star Wars film like the original trilogy and kept it with more adult themes and a mostly adult cast, kids still would have turned out. It still would have made $1 billion. So
yeah, exactly. And then Padme, like we were talking about earlier, she pretty much vanished in terms of from the narrative.
In Attack of the Clones, Padme and Anakin rekindled their relationship. Anakin's a young adult now. But what happened was George Lucas, instead of giving her a strong storyline, she ends up just becoming an intimate and sexual object for Anakin, and the entire storyline for them in the film is them falling in love.
Yeah, and like the scenes where they're at her house or in like her estate.
Yeah, they go to
It's cute, but like still you're kind of just diluting Padme's character and Queen Amidala's character.
Yeah, and the structure of the story is while there's like 5 scenes of them doing like he's protecting her at her home, and there's like 5 different scenes of them just laughing and giggling and talking about ex-boyfriends and girlfriends and stuff. And then meanwhile, Obi-Wan's like taking shit and doing crazy shit the entire time, like going on these insane missions, like doing all the work. And then Anakin and Padme are just like prancing around in fields, and it kind of ruins the film, and it doesn't feel well. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it happens a lot to a lot of female characters in Hollywood, unfortunately, because, again, Padme was such a strong, interesting, and complex character, and then you're talking about the delusion of her to just being like a female relationship for Anakin. It kind of ruins it for me in terms of Padme, because they could have done so much with her by the end of the trilogy.
If Anakin was older in the first one, by now, they could have been a more naturally growing relationship between them two. But in this film, it's just so very forced, and it feels so unnatural. Like when Anakin sees her again after 10 years, he tells Obi-Wan that he's been thinking about her every day since he was 10 years old.
Psycho.
Which is a little obsessive. And he also tells Obi-Wan that instead of nightmares, he wishes he could just dream about Padme every night. It's so forced that and Anakin literally just spouts out everything he's feeling inside. So it lost any kind of subtlety or natural growth between them two.
So many red flags. Like, I would never want to date someone who's been thinking of me every day for 10 years.
Yeah.
Or dreams about me every night.
And then there's that scene where Anakin's looking at her like super sexually, and then and Padme goes, "Stop looking at me, you're making me uncomfortable." And then Anakin just smirks at her. It's like, what the fuck?
they ruined Padme's character. It's too bad, man.
Yeah. So she lost her power in the story, but what ends up happening in this film is that Chancellor Palpatine, being the Dark Sith Lord that we end up discovering he sets up Anakin and Padme to get back together. Because he secretly carried out that initial attack on Padme's ship. When Padme goes to the council asking about the attack, Chancellor Palpatine is the one who recommends that Anakin and Obi-Wan protect her, because he knows that he needs Anakin and Padme to get together in order to create Darth Vader
And fulfill the prophecy.
Yeah, so he knows that Anakin's love for Padme will ultimately destroy him. So he sets this all up. Being the Sith Lord, he can see into the future, and he knows exactly what strings to pull. And so there's this great dynamic between Padme and the Chancellor, where she thinks that he's a great diplomat and a friend and an ally, but ultimately he's been using her and Anakin the entire time. And then with Revenge of the Sith, Padme is pretty much just, like we said, been reduced to Anakin's wife. She's completely lost any kind of plot development or character arc. All that happens to her in this film is she gets pregnant, and then she worries about Anakin.
Does a lot of pleading and begging.
And then they have that final scene together on the lava planet, and that's pretty much her entire plot in this film. So ultimately, yes, her character carries out a very important act in giving birth to Luke and Leia, but her plot development in this movie is just completely absent. I think she even disappears for more than an hour in the movie, where it's just like, what the hell happened to Padme?
Because when Obi-Wan and Anakin are on their missions, like for like an hour and 10, you don't even see her at all, and she's just kind of like, they just forget about her. And again, like we said earlier, they took her out of the narrative, basically sacrificed her storylines for Anakin's storylines.
Yeah, which I think was a mistake. If they kept it more balanced, then the relationship could have had a stronger impact on the story. But ultimately, Padme's main storyline is that Anakin foresaw her death of giving birth in a dream, and so she's trying to deal with the idea that she could possibly die in childbirth, which ultimately happens because that foresight and the fear of losing Padme is what drives Anakin to the dark side, and going to the dark side is what ends up causing her death at childbirth.
Because he's the one who harms her and forces the childbirth issues.
Yeah, so it's this ironic tragedy of, by trying to prevent her death, he caused her death. And so if he had just listened to her, none of this would have happened.
And then we'll talk about the Star Wars trilogies at some point soon.
Yeah.
And we'll cover this one, the Phantom Menace trilogy, because although they have flaws, there's some great parts of them, especially the lightsaber battles are badass in this
Great
trilogy.
battles.
I mean, the lava planet battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin is one of the best in the entire lore and franchise of the movies.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So we'll touch on them at some point eventually, but
Obi-Wan's great. I love
Ewan McGregor as
Ewan
Obi-Wan.
McGregor as Obi-Wan. He's great.
Man, he could be my Obi-Wan any day.
He'll give you an Obi-Wan.
And the ironic thing with being one of the lead actors in probably the biggest film franchise at the time on the planet for 6 years was after she was done with it, a lot of directors didn't really want to work with Natalie. And same thing is kind of happening to Daisy Ridley, where despite starring in 3 of the biggest movies over the last decade, she has had trouble finding work in major films as a lead actress. And it's kind of an odd thing that happens when you reach such high levels of success on a project and then the phone stops ringing. And not that Daisy's not getting work now, but Natalie found her way out of it, of course. And
I think what Natalie did was, you're right, because between like 2006 and 2010, weren't many incredibly iconic roles for her. But what I think she did was she navigated the indie film realm and did some really great small independent films, which we'll get into in a bit. And that solidified her status among great filmmakers and producers and writers of, yes, she's a great actor, but she only had so much she could do in the Star Wars movies and acting-wise. Pretty limited. George Lucas isn't the biggest acting director. He's more focused on the entire picture itself. And there are actually plenty of actors who say, like, George Lucas, like, he's like, just go up there and say your lines, pretty much. So you're kind of like on your own as an actor. Whereas with the independent films, she got to show her real range and talent, which is what eventually led to her having like a career renaissance when she in her early 30s, I think. And so I think Daisy really should do the same thing because she's immensely talented. I mean, I think she's just like Natalie Portman, where she's so natural of an actor and she can emote so much, and she's just incredibly talented as an actor. And I think she'll eventually grow into a career outside of Star Wars, but I think if she sticks to small independent films, grows her career in a different area of film, then she'll have more success later on.
It makes sense because, again, it happens to a lot of people and actors who work in such like big franchises. You kind of almost fall into like a typecasting sort of situation. But again, during Star Wars, Natalie was in a lot of actually really great films. She in 2003, she was in Cold Mountain, not one of the lead roles, but she's an important character in the film, and she stars opposite in scenes with Jude Law, who she also is in Closer in 2004 with. And Closer is a great role for Natalie because this got her first Oscar nomination, and it stars Jude Law, Natalie Portman, Julia Roberts, and Clive Owen with these 2 American women in England and these 2 English actors. And it's basically a film about love at first sight. It's about seduction, betrayal, and it's really about getting what you deserve in the end.
Yeah, and it's a movie about breaking up with someone. And ultimately, I think one of the main themes of the movie is breaking up with someone that you still love, which is something that we have to do from time to time. Even though you love someone, you have to cut them out of your life in certain situations. And then this happens to both couples in this movie. And Portman she plays an obscure young woman who is incredibly infectiously charming and alluring, and then there's just a quality about her that it seems like she's like a very free person, not hindered down by society or rules or anything. So she's an attractive person to be around, and then she ends up catching the eye of Jude Law's character. They actually, like you said, fall in love at first sight, which actually leads to her getting hit by a car, and he takes her to the hospital, which is how they start their relationship.
Yeah, it's a great movie directed by Mike Nichols, who did The Graduate.
He's a great English director.
And then a really well-written script by Patrick Marber. So if you've never seen it, check it out. And it's like, instead of a love triangle, it's like a love square, because Jude Law's character meets Natalie Portman's character, fall in love at first sight, but then Jude Law writes a book about the relationship. Then he falls in love with the photographer of his headshots, who's played by Julia Roberts, and then he falls in love and they have a relationship. And then Clive Owen, Julia Roberts falls for Clive Owen's character in the film, but then Natalie Portman's character then falls in love with Clive Owen. So it's a bunch of people who are like kind of just like getting different relationships, and it's about when they're not with the one they love the one they're with.
In every relationship, there's, no matter what, to some extent, there's someone in the relationship that has a little bit more power over the other person. Sometimes it's a big drastic difference. Sometimes it's very close to being balanced. But I think to a certain point in a relationship, someone has a little less power than the other person. And so with Portman's character, she has less power than Jude Law's character because he ends up getting bored with her because he knows that she needs him and then he doesn't need her. So, like, she can't live without him, and she's utterly devoted to him and head over heels in love with him. And yes, he loves her, but he ends up being dismayed by her devotion to him. And so, which is why he ends up falling for Julia Roberts, because Julia Roberts isn't desperately in need of him. And so that's why he gets bored with Natalie Portman. He had all the power, and he rejected her. And then when he goes to Julia Roberts, they have a relationship, but then Julia Roberts leaves him to go back to Clive Owen. And so Jude Law didn't have the power in that relationship. You see, he had the power over Natalie Portman, but he didn't have power over Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts had the power in that relationship. She rejected him. And so since he lost his power in that relationship, he thinks, okay, I'll go back to Natalie Portman because I still have power over her. And he thinks he does, and they get back together. We think they're back together, but ultimately she was deceiving him the whole time so that she could be the one that breaks up with him now, because now she has the power in the relationship. She gained it back by him coming back to her, and she tricks him and pretty much leads him on just so that she can break up with him and tear his heart apart.
Little do we know, and little did the filmmakers know, this would be a precursor for every modern dating relationship times 10.
Except now it's done over texting and ghosting.
And having spent the previous years of her career turning down sexualized roles, Closer was like the most sexualized part she'd ever play, being a stripper in several of the scenes. And again, a very iconic look with the hair, the pink hair, which you've seen in Halloween costumes and everything. And I think Natalie's great in this movie, and it's a really well-written script. If you've never seen it, check it out. All right, let's move on to V for Vendetta in 2005, directed by James McTeague, working off a script by the Wachowski siblings who did the Matrix trilogy, and they also produced the film. One of my all-time favorite graphic novel comic book movies. I think it's highly underrated and kind of just swept away nowadays because of the delusion of other superhero movies into cinema. But this is a great one. Again, 2005, the same year the Batman Begins came out. And it's a great movie. You've never seen it.
I adore this movie, and like you said, it was underrated and didn't make that much money when it came out, but it has become a cult classic. And it is a superhero movie, but unlike pretty much every other superhero movie, this has really incredibly complex, deep socio-political themes that are actually relevant now more than ever before. I mean, this movie is about the world has fallen into disillusion and chaos due to an international viral outbreak. And because of the outbreak, the UK falls into a fascist communist government, which has taken control of the country in order to protect its citizens, which is historically how communist dictatorships have taken over people and countries, is by protecting them, they take over their entire lives. I think now more so than ever before, it seems like this might be a possibility one day.
It could be. It's very scary to watch if you haven't seen this before.
Yeah.
And with everything going on in the world right now. This was a bold role for an actress to take because it involved a very serious decision of shaving your head, which a lot of actresses wouldn't be on board for, especially in Hollywood, because it definitely affects the kind of roles that you can get future on. Of course, you can wear wigs and stuff like that for roles, but it definitely will affect what you can get and what you can audition for. And the thing with Natalie, I think she had no regret doing it and didn't have any hesitation to do it because she knows she's so talented. She's also found so much success in her career, but it's also probably something new that she wanted to do in a challenge. But she still managed to find plenty of work and roles while her hair grew back.
Yeah, I think it became a cool fashion thing, a fad that year after she shaved her head, because I feel like people loved it. Yeah, exactly. And it was a great way to film it. They filmed it in one take with 3 different camera setups, so it was all in camera in one shot. And she, obviously, being the great actress she is, she just crushes that moment, and you can just see the emotions pouring out of her as she's getting her head shaved by who we think is someone else, but it's actually V the whole time.
And like many interesting characters in film and stories, Evie, played by Natalie Portman, goes through a very immense transformation in this film, like you said, involving the haircut, both physically and emotionally. Like, Natalie Portman virtually plays 2 roles in this movie. The Evie before she meets V, living her life working for the communist countries TV news station, as well as the Evie after she meets V, and after V has liberated Evie and created her into the new Evie with the shaved head and new purpose in life.
Yeah, I think this is probably Natalie Portman's biggest character transformation in any of her films because she, like you said, she starts and ends as polar opposites of one person. And
Well, Black Swan too.
Yeah, I guess actually. I feel like this is a bigger transformation though. And just like the second half of the movie when she comes back to V and she still has her head shaved and she talks about that story where she was in the grocery store and her friend didn't even recognize her. And it's not just because of the shaved head, it's because of her character has changed. Her personality has changed. You know what I mean? Everything about her has changed. So it's not just that her friend didn't recognize her face, it's that she didn't even recognize the person.
Yeah, and this film and story is very similar to Phantom of the Opera. V and the Phantom are both masked, move through subterranean spaces. But the thing about, and even kind of like Batman in a way, but the thing with V and his mask, it's Guy Fawkes, and he's smiling, which is kind of ironic to a vigilante in terms of that we've seen on screen before. And having that always smiling expression with Hugo Weaving's amazing dialogue behind it just makes it feel so much more surreal. And again, less like a superhero, but more like almost like this articulate literary hero.
And actually, speaking of literary hero, he's based on partly by the Count of Monte Cristo. They have very similar storylines where, just like the Count of Monte Cristo, V is falsely imprisoned, goes through torture. He survives torture and confinement, and then he escapes his imprisonment and seeks revenge on the people who were responsible for his confinement. Very much like Count of Monte Cristo, which is why he and Evie watched that movie in the film.
And of course, we will cover this full movie
there's a lot to talk
in
about.
Another episode because I think it's really, like Leo said, it's very relevant today more than ever.
Yeah.
And it's a great movie, great script, great directing. Natalie Portman kills this movie. Hugo Weaving is awesome in it. And I love this movie. It's fantastic.
And I just want to say that V and Evie actually share extremely similar storylines and transitions into becoming the eventual character they are, whereas they both undergo disfigurement. V ended up getting burnt up, and then Evie gets her head shaved. So they go through a physical scarring, and then V was born into becoming V through fire. And then Evie was reborn through water when she goes outside and the rain is falling on her. So it's like, and that song's actually called Evie Reborn. So she's being rebirthed in water, opposite to how V was reborn in fire. And then at the movie, V dies, which leaves room for Evie for forgiveness and rebirth as this character.
Yeah, and V is such an interesting character because not only is he out for revenge, but he's also starting a revolution against the fascist government.
Yeah.
And it's a really intense film when Evie is captured and she goes through her torture, and, you know, V went through torture and went through hell to be, like you said, reborn and created into V.
Yeah. And
Evie goes also through torture and hell to become the new version of herself.
It's kind of like this metaphor where, to a certain extent, life is suffering, and in order to really become a great person, you have to endure some kind of suffering to achieve greatness. And so they obviously went through intense suffering. And then ultimately it leads to that final decision where V leaves it into the hands of Evie to eventually signal the bomb and carry out the bombing of Parliament. And this is a metaphor for the fact that it's not just Evie that's carrying it out. She's doing it for the people. It couldn't be V that carried it out because V is a vigilante and anarchist, so it wouldn't feel right if he is the one who caused the explosion. So he leaves it into the hands of Evie, the people.
Let's hear some fun facts.
Hugo Weaving actually replaced another actor 4 weeks after filming. It was James Purefoy was playing V for 4 weeks, and Hugo Weaving eventually took his place. And those scenes are still in the movie with a different actor. It's maybe like 10% of the scenes. But you can't tell because he's wearing a mask the whole time.
And they just voiced up Hugo over it.
Yeah.
Do you know why he got booted from the production?
I think it was because some kind of creative differences. Yeah. And obviously it ended up working out because Hugo was great. And then the domino scene where V knocks over all those dominoes. It was 22,000 dominoes.
It's real. Yeah, it wasn't CGI.
It was all real. It's crazy. And it's funny, the group Anonymous, they got their logo and they were inspired by the Guy Fawkes mask in this movie. And then after Star Wars,
during Star Wars.
During Star Wars, Natalie Portman, in her time off, like I said, began making small independent films. And, I mean, you can't get any smaller than this movie. It's Garden State, Zach Braff's directorial debut, which is a really, really cute, quirky, romantic comedy that Zach Braff wrote partly based on his own experiences in life. And Natalie Portman plays a completely different character from Padme, from Matilda, from her previous roles. And she's just incredibly charming and fun and
very dorky,
very
and nerdy-ish.
dorky. Like, this is if you look up quirky in a dictionary, it's Natalie Portman's character in this movie. It's kind of like she gives this jolt of life to Zach Braff's character that he was missing.
If you're a fan of Zach Braff and you never heard of this, like if you love Scrubs and he's a really funny guy, he's a great writer and director, it's a good movie. And Zach Braff got nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Screenplay for this. So it's a really well-written script. It's very relatable to anyone who's grown up in like a life like that, in a situation like that. If you like Wes Anderson films, you'll adore this movie.
Yeah. It's not as inventive filmmaking-wise, but it has very similar ideas and themes and characters. And it's a very touching film, and it's essentially about a young man who, through his tragic past and personal problems, he's essentially lost his ability to feel and have emotions. And then meeting Natalie Portman's character, Sam, he learns to feel again, and her infectious nature drives him. It gives him this spark to like care about life again. Yeah, but it's a very cute film, very fun romantic comedy. It actually won the Grammy for Best Soundtrack. Zach Braff made one of the best playlists ever for a movie, I think, in this film. Made the Shins famous, I think. And it's a good movie.
And then 2007, she made the short film Hotel Chevalier, which was written and directed by Wes Anderson and was a prologue, basically, to the Darjeeling Limited. She also has a cameo in that film. The 13-minute short film stars her and Jason Schwartzman as former lovers who reunite inside a hotel room in France. It was also the first time that Natalie filmed an extended nude scene that made the final cut in the film. She filmed a nude scene, the stripping scene with Clive Owen in Closer. There's shots that they filmed of her being completely nude, but they cut that from the film. But this is the first, I think, the only movie since that she's actually gone full nude for a film. And she ended up regretting it because pretty much all the attention was paid to that rather than the quality of the film.
Yeah, that's her problem with nudity, because she's a fan of nudity in film because it can be expressed in a very artful and adult way. It can be very mature. But the problem that often happens with, especially with famous actors and actresses, is when they get nude in a scene, is that's all people care about. Is like when they got naked in a scene and it gets put online, and it changes the idea of the movie is just about her here's this short film where Natalie Portman got naked, rather than here's this great short film.
Yeah, and Wes does it in an artistic way where, like, it's not just like in your face, here's Natalie Portman nude, but like she's like, it's like kind of hidden too. Like she's like leaning against the table, and she has no pants on or anything, and it's again done tastefully in Wes Anderson's way. Mm-hmm. But it's a great little short film. If you like the Darjeeling Limited, you got to watch it because it's connected to it.
Yeah. And then another small film that she made, which I really like, and I don't think a lot of people have seen, is Brothers,
That's what I was going to bring up.
With Jake Gyllenhaal and Tobey Maguire, where Tobey Maguire plays AWOL soldier, and Jake Gyllenhaal is his brother, and Natalie Portman plays Tobey Maguire's wife. And after Tobey Maguire's been gone for so long, she and Jake Gyllenhaal's character establish first a friendship and then an intimate relationship. But then Tobey Maguire comes back home.
Yeah, and the thing with this, Jake Gyllenhaal's character is kind of like the troubled brother. He's always in and out of trouble. And then they have the intimate affair and relationship. And then Tobey Maguire's character has been in a POW camp and going through torture and hell. And then when he finally makes it home and he finds out that his brother and his wife have had an intimate relationship, it's very emotional, very intense. Yeah. I'm sure this was a hard film to make for all of them. I love Jake in dark roles like this and emotional scenes, and kind of like Prisoners. And Toby is awesome in this because he's really, at this point, he was Spider-Man. Yeah. And this is a few years after Spider-Man 3. And so you finally got to see like a different take on a character for Tobey Maguire.
Yeah, I couldn't be further from Peter Parker. And he's great because in his situation, he survived this POW camp and returned home, and his brother's in a relationship with his wife. But on their side, they thought he was dead. It was years before he came back, so they thought he was never going to come back. So it's a complicated situation. And they make it very relatable because all three of them are fantastic actors.
And man, that kitchen blowout, holy crap. It gives me goosebumps every time.
Yeah.
And then Natalie also did a bunch of movies like Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, The Other Boleyn Girl, New York I Love You, The Other Woman, Hesher in 2010, which she co-produced and starred in with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's a pretty cool indie film if you've never seen it.
Yeah.
And then in 2010, Natalie Portman was in Black Swan, which was the film that got her Oscar win and her BAFTA. This is directed by Darren Aronofsky. And it tells the story of a committed ballet dancer who struggles to maintain her sanity after winning the lead role in the production of Swan Lake.
Black Swan is one of the best films of the last 20 years, I think. And I believe it's Aronofsky's best film and Natalie Portman's best performance. This is such a great psychological horror thriller that you rarely see anymore. And it's such a powerful, interesting, intriguing, but also terrifying movie about the psychological breakdown of this character.
Yeah, it's, again, her most challenging and her best performance for sure. And the fun thing about this movie is you can interpret it different ways, and and Aronofsky kind of leaves an ambiguous ending towards the end of the film. Obviously, you've never seen this film. We will be spoiling it a little bit. And ballet is an incredibly beautiful art form. I have a good friend of mine who's a ballet dancer professionally, but it's also hidden with all sorts of pain and issues. And, you know, she's told me stories about the damage it does to your feet. I've seen a ballet dancer's feet. It's no joke. Damage to your joints, your knees, your body. Female dancers have to maintain like a low body weight for performing to be able to lift it up and everything, and they have to be light and nimble. It requires years and years of dedication and countless hours of practice. And Natalie's entire identity throughout the film is achieving perfection, and you watch the emotional trauma that she goes through just to achieve it.
Ultimately about Natalie Portman's transition into becoming the Black Swan, which is a metaphor for her transitioning from adolescence into adulthood as a woman, because Nina has grown up in a very sheltered environment. Her mother has kept her in a small bubble of the dancing community. So Nina has no friends except for her mother. Her room is still dressed out as if it was a kid's room. There's lots of pinks and purples.
She has butterflies, stuffed animals.
Yeah, it looks like a little kid's room, but she's an adult. So she's lived a very sheltered life. Her mother has kept her sheltered in order to achieve the perfection of becoming the greatest dancer alive. And then as an adult, she has no friends. She's not friends with any of the other ballet dancers. She keeps to herself. But also the way she dresses, lots of pinks, lots of purples. She dresses like most young girls will dress. And then her wardrobe actually changes throughout the film, where she has a lot of pinks and purples, and then she starts wearing more whites and grays and muted tones, and then she starts wearing darker tones like charcoals and blacks. And this alludes to the fact that with pinks and purples, it represents innocence and purity, and then with the whites and neutrals and grays, it represents indifference and detachment, because she's in the middle of the transition of becoming a woman. And then when she finally is a woman, she's wearing a lot of blacks and dark grays, which shows rebellion and maturity as an adult.
Yeah, because like you said, Nina represents like the fragile, innocent white swan, whereas Lily, played by Mila Kunis, represents the dark and seductive black swan, with her dark makeup, clothing, and the black swan wing tattoo on her back.
With Lily's character, she represents Nina's first ever interaction with any kind of sexuality and intimacy, because part of why she is still mentally an adolescent is because she's never had sex. She's never experienced intimacy. And so that's why she, at this moment in her life, can't play the Black Swan, because she doesn't know anything about sex or sexuality. And so Lily's character is her first ever interaction with someone on an intimate level.
Yeah, and what happens in the film is the director of Swan Lake needs a replacement for the lead dancer, and Nina's obviously the first choice because she's so talented. However, there's a new competition with this new dancer, Lily, who comes out of nowhere, played by Mila Kunis, and the two build this odd rivalry and eventually a twisted friendship and competition over getting the part.
And the rivalry stems from Nina is the most talented, but Lily has the sexual energy and confidence in order to portray the Black Swan.
And throughout the film, and throughout trying to be cast as the Black Swan and get the lead role, Natalie Portman goes through all sorts of hallucinations, and she kind of doesn't know what's real anymore because you can interpret it that she's possibly dealing with schizophrenia. She's seeing things that aren't real, but she thinks are completely real. Like the intimate sex scene with Lily, she thinks was 100% real. She thinks it happened, but it really was a hallucination. Mm-hmm. She's hallucinating, seeing portraits on the walls moving and dancing and laughing at her.
She's seeing her reflection looking back at her and moving in its own way.
And her body is transforming throughout the film. She is developing this rash on her back, which is slowly spreading, and it seems to be where wings are about to sprout. And there's that really disturbing scene where she's picking at that scab and the big rash on her back, and it's almost like the follicles on like a skinless chicken breast are poking out, and she pulls out that little baby follicle feather, and it's just like, what the fuck is going on with this woman? But again, she's hallucinating that she's turning into the Black Swan.
Yeah, what I think she's doing is she's destroying the child that she has been. She's like breaking down the child Nina in order to become the adult Nina.
And as she transforms, the way she handles her relationships transforms too. She rejects her mother, her controlling ways. She strikes up that friendship and intimate relationship with Lily that she thinks happened. And she's going out and partying and dancing, and things start to become intense between her and her instructor, who's played by Vincent Cassel. It's awesome, this movie.
Yeah, it's Thomas Leroy. And Leroy knows that Nina is the most talented dancer he has, but he's trying to set loose the sexuality that he needs Nina to possess in order to properly portray Black Swan, because he knows that she's inexperienced intimately, she's very childlike, and with all the talent she has, it's not enough to get the role. And she needs to become a woman in order to play the Black Swan. And so he tries in many ways to elicit these sexual responses from her. And a really cool aspect of this film is, since this movie is mostly about self-identity, nearly every single shot in this movie has a reflective surface of some kind, whether it's a mirror or some kind of piece of metal with a reflective surface. So you can oftentimes, like 95% of the time, you can see Nina's reflection in some way in a shot.
Which is also interpreted in one of her final hallucinations towards the end of the film, where it's the final performance of Swan Lake. And this is the scene where she confronts Lily in the dressing room, and she attacks Lily. But while she's attacking Lily, Lily turns into Nina as the Black Swan, and she sees herself as Lily. And then she kills herself. She stabs Lily in the stomach with the broken piece of glass. And Nina, who's the Black Swan in front of her, turns back into Lily, and she's seen that she's killed and stabbed Lily.
Yeah. And so Aronofsky and Natalie Portman intentionally placed the blood stain on Nina's dress in her groin region to give the idea that in a metaphorical way, Nina has had her first period and she's finally transitioned into adulthood.
And so then eventually Nina, after she hallucinates killing Lily, she goes onto stage and hallucinates that she has fully transformed into the Black Swan. And while she's performing, she's growing these black feathers throughout her arms. Her arms begin to turn into full wings. And it's actually really beautiful, but also terrifying CGI going on. And she gives a masterful performance. And the film ends with her diving onto the mattress. She's given the greatest performance. She's getting the standing ovation. The crowd's going crazy. And then everyone approaches her and is so happy about it. But then they see, and Vincent Cassel's character sees that she's bleeding from her stomach because she killed herself. She stabbed herself before going on stage as the Black Swan. And for me, it's a metaphor that she had to kill herself to become the Black Swan. She had to die.
She had to kill the child Nina in order to become the Black Swan, yeah, and to become an adult.
And the ending, again, you can interpret it for yourself. If she dies before the movie ends, if she dies later on, or if she survives. But personally, for me, I think that Nina eventually dies.
Yeah, I think she dies in the end. But it's a fascinating movie. I adore it. And it's actually, Black Swan is one of the most successful movies of all time. This movie was made on a tiny, tiny budget of $13 million. And it made $330 million on box office. So it made a profit of over $300 million, which is why it's so successful. I mean, yeah, the Marvel movies are making $1 billion, but those are $300 million productions. This movie made $330 million on a $13 million budget. So it is considered, hands down, one of the most profitable films ever made in history.
That's probably how Aronofsky was able to do Noah after that.
Yeah.
And Portman went through a lot while filming Black Swan. She broke a rib. She also had a serious injury to her ankle. There was really no medic on set because low budget production didn't really allow for it. She lost 20 pounds for the role, so she's very skinny in the film, training up to 16 hours a day. And again, she'd been practicing ballet since she was 4, and she still kept up with classes here and there, but she also paid for all of her own ballet training in this film.
And we've talked about it before, but the stunt dancer, the main stunt dancer, she took issue with the final product of the film, saying that it was unfair for Natalie Portman to get all this Oscar attention because she didn't do all of the dancing. But Aronofsky and the producers eventually proved that Natalie Portman actually performed 80% of all the dancing untouched, because the rest of the dancing was so intense that only a professional ballerina could do the moves. So they had this stunt dancer perform those routines, and they digitally put Natalie Portman's face on her. But I think it was unfair to try and exclaim that it was a fake dance routine by Portman when in fact she performed 80% of all the dances herself.
And she's the actor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an actress playing the role.
Yeah.
And then ironically, both Mila and Natalie next went on to star in very similar competing romantic comedies where Natalie was in No Strings Attached in 2011 with Ashton Kutcher, which is actually a kind of a funny movie. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think she produced it too. And again, Mila was in Friends with Benefits, which also starred Justin Timberlake, which was not that good.
They were the same movie, and I think they came out in the same year.
Yeah, that they were the same year,
Yeah.
2011. It was like the next movie they both
But No Strings
did.
Attached was a lot better.
So it's kind of funny. They're like best buds. They were just in Black Swan.
Yeah.
And they do exactly like the same movies. But I would understand them wanting to do something like that because Black Swan, I'm sure, was a very intense situation to film and act in. And then they probably just want to do something light. I just want to laugh and have fun on set for 4 months and have a good time.
Yeah, and No Strings Attached is a great romantic comedy that's also pretty dirty and very adultish at times, which is nice to see and refreshing to see because so many romantic comedies are very PG-13 and safe, and they don't really talk about sex too much. But this is a fun film.
And then in 2011, she also was in Thor, the first Thor, which was a big deal because with Thor, we were starting to see like legit established movie stars crossing into that superhero genre.
Yeah.
Yes, Christian Bale was Batman, but he wasn't a huge actor. And yes, Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man, but Downey was not a global icon at the time. He was just out of jail. He was in a few movies. He was in Zodiac, yes, but he wasn't the megastar he is now. But then you get someone like Natalie Portman to be in your movie, which is a big deal.
Yeah, I think, what was she, the first Oscar winner to be in a Marvel movie?
Yeah, Hemsworth wasn't even a star yet, and he was Thor.
Hemsworth was actually up for the role with Liam Hemsworth. They were competing for Thor.
Oh, really?
So the role of Thor came down to them two.
Whoever's the most jacked, basically. And Hemsworth is like 3 inches taller and way more jacked.
So Kenneth Branagh had to choose between either Chris Hemsworth or Liam Hemsworth for Thor.
He was like, all right, I'll give you guys 6 months. Whoever has the biggest arms by the time we film gets the role.
Chris obviously won.
Yeah, of course. And big arms, man.
But Liam got Hunger Games, so it worked out for him.
Yeah, so Portman plays Jane Foster, who is Thor's love interest throughout the MCU universe. She's very fun in this movie. She gets to display a lot of her great traits, Natalie Portman's traits, like her charm and her intelligence. The film is cheesy at times, like those old Marvel original movies were in those Avengers franchises, but it still has great moments, and the characters, again, weren't like fully formed yet into what they'd be becoming. It's like when you watch season 1 of The Office, it's like they haven't taken them to the full limits and figured out how they can do it.
Yeah, I mean Thor's bleached eyebrows and beard are just ridiculous in this movie.
And he's funny in this movie, but he's not like Thor Ragnarok funny.
Yeah, well, in Ragnarok, it's just Chris Hemsworth being Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, it's hysterical.
But it's fun. It's a fish out of water movie. Jane thinks that Thor is like just delusional, crazy guy until they slowly learn that he actually is a god from another realm. But I think Portman took this role because essentially she is the love interest for Thor. But she plays a scientist, which I think is she's always thinking about the effect she has on young women as a role model. So I think that being able to play a character like a scientist in a huge movie that a lot of young women are going to see was very appealing to her because she's not playing the hero, but at least she can play not just some damsel in distress, but a intellectual and successful woman.
Yeah. And Natalie reprised her role very briefly as Jane Foster in Avengers Endgame, and will be back as Jane Foster again in Thor: Love and Thunder. But this time, Natalie Portman is going to become the new Thor, Lady Thor, Goddess of Thunder. And I'm not really sure what this means for Hemsworth in terms of him being Thor, if he's going to be out of the MCU in general, or he'll be just kind of disappear. If he dies in the film, who knows? But it's going to be great to see Natalie as Thor, see a female Thor, which is what happens in the comic books. Before anyone gets angry, it's staying true to the books.
I'm really looking forward to it because having Natalie Portman back is obviously such a plus, but to have her as Thor, it's very intriguing and appealing, and I'm very curious to see what they do with it. Yeah, I think she'll do a great job.
I can't wait to see it because Thor Ragnarok is awesome.
Yeah.
And now you're putting Natalie Portman back in. It's going to be great.
But I think Thor's role is that he's not going to be gone, but I think Thor will obviously still be a hero, but maybe he just won't be able to wield the hammer. Jane will have the hammer, so maybe he'll have the axe instead. I don't know. But I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Maybe they'll turn Thor into like what they did with Padme in Star Wars. He's just
he's the love interest.
He's just like the love interest, like house dad.
He gets pregnant.
Yeah. I have baby.
But also, I think it's something that Marvel really needed to do after what happened with Thor: The Dark World, because Natalie Portman after Dark World pretty much quit the Marvel universe, and the reason for this was because Patty Jenkins, the filmmaker who made Wonder Woman, she was actually signed on to direct Thor 2 for almost a year. She was in pre-production, in writing the script with a couple other people, and so she was going to be the director of Thor 2. But a very similar thing that happened with Edgar Wright at the last minute, she was fired from Marvel and taken off the production out of creative differences, because the same thing with Edgar Wright. He had a direction for Ant-Man. Patty Jenkins had a direction and story for Thor, but it didn't fit in line with Marvel's overarching storyline to connect all of the universes and films together. And so they fired her for that. And it happened so last minute that Natalie Portman, rightfully so, took great offense to it and decided, like, this is bullshit. Like, how could they do this to Patty Jenkins, and decided to not be she didn't want to be in another Marvel movie after that. But now, obviously, they've made amends, and having Natalie Portman take up the hammer is the smartest thing Marvel's done in a while.
Yeah, and Patty Jenkins obviously fantastically directed Wonder Woman, which is probably DC's best movie in their new universe.
In the DC universe, is the best movie.
It's probably the best movie, the original Wonder Woman, not counting the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
And you got to respect Natalie Portman. Again, we talked about her earlier. She's so outspoken and such a huge figure in gender equality. And that's a really important thing to do, because, yes, saying things is one thing, but your actions speak louder than words. And to drop out of the film because Patty Jenkins got booted from the film, that's speaking much louder than saying something online about it.
Yeah, 100%. She sticks to her guns.
All right, let's move on briefly to Jackie in 2016. Natalie Portman plays Jackie Kennedy, and the film chronicles her life immediately after the assassination of her husband, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And this film is a portrait of one of the most important and tragic moments in American history, easily in the last 100 years. And it's seen through the eyes of the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, and she's in every single scene. I know the original script, she was out of like 20 pages of it, but I think when she signed on, her and the director requested that every scene that she wasn't in be cut from the script or changed, and eventually they cut like 22 pages out of the script. So Jackie is the movie. She's in every scene, and it's a unique film because whenever we're talking about a film taking place in the White House with presidents, we always just see the president. We don't really see anything else. But this is about the family. This is about the First Lady, who's also probably the second most powerful person in the world, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool to see it from her perspective.
We barely see JFK in this movie because the movie, like you said, is told from the perspective of Jackie. And Jackie Kennedy was such an iconic person. She was probably the most famous person in America for a decade. Every woman followed her in terms of fashion, style, grace, and she was adored by the American public in such a profound way. And so it's a it's a role that I don't think many people could ever pull off. And Natalie Portman, even though they bear very little resemblance to one another, Natalie Portman, I think, perfectly embodied Jackie O, but still did her own spin on it, where I felt like Jackie O was on screen. And it's probably her most refined performance and showed how much control she has as an actor, because Jackie O had a very specific way of talking, very specific physical mannerisms. Her accent was a blend of New York and something else, and so it was a very unique dialect. And
Very articulate,
a very articulate woman, and Natalie Portman absolutely knocked this out of the park.
Yeah, and it's a cool thing if you watch like these old tours that Jackie gave. She gave this old film tour of the White House. I think every first lady does this.
She started it.
Okay, so Jackie started the tours of the White House, and you can actually look this up on YouTube and watch Jackie giving a tour of all the different areas, the Rose Garden, different rooms and everything, in which they do in the film too. And it's incredibly similar and uncanny, the performance that Natalie Portman gives of Jackie. It's just like eerily similar, like the same person on screen almost. Like that's how good she is as Jackie.
Yeah, and this movie essentially it's about a woman dealing with the grief of the loss of her husband. It's a very simple story, but it's told in the perspective of this amazingly huge woman in popular culture. And what happens in this film is for the first half of this film, Jackie has no control over anything. Her husband's been shot, and she's trying to deal with the aftermath of it. She doesn't know how she's going to talk to her kids. How do you tell your kids that that their dad's dead, and what happens to them after this? And so throughout the film, her character eventually transitioned into a person who is taking control of the narrative. So the film is built around the structure of an interview she's giving a journalist who's writing a story about her and the incident. And at first, he's trying to elicit quotes and responses about John F. Kennedy's death. And then it gets to the final scene where she tells the journalist that she's going to approve of what he says. He can only write what she says he can write, and it won't be published without her approval. So she's finally taking control of her life and taking control of her story. So no one else can tell her story now. She's in charge of how the narrative goes on.
And I think one of the most moving scenes in the film for me is after JFK gets shot and assassinated, and Natalie Portman's character Jackie, the family's been living in the specific quarters in the White House of the president. And then you see Lyndon B. Johnson takes power, becomes president of the United States. And then there's this very awkward situation where the Johnsons are like moving into that wing of the White House, and Jackie kind of has to take her kids and all her belongings and leave that part of the White House, and she has to leave the White House pretty much immediately after the death. Yeah, so it's just really odd to see that like this family who's been living here just has to get kicked out kind of, and there's a new family in power now.
Yeah.
And Jackie Kennedy was a woman who put up with a lot. You know, when we think of JFK, we think very fondly of the man. He was a great president in what little time he had. And
he did a lot for civil rights. He did the space race, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He did a lot. He accomplished a lot.
But, I mean, he has a flawed record as a president, like all presidents do. Bay of Pigs, for example. But also, JFK was a flawed husband, and he was a flawed husband with his infidelity, and they touch upon that, obviously, because Jackie had to deal with that her entire marriage to JFK.
Yeah, he was a womanizer of the highest order.
So I'm glad they kept those things in the film, and glad they showed like parts of what really it was like to be married to JFK.
Yeah, it was an authentic portrait. They didn't try to skew away from that, because it defines who she is as a person. But I think it's a great film, and it's so well directed and shot. It's shot on 16 mil, and it looks amazing.
It's beautiful. All right, we're gonna move on and do one more movie. Annihilation, which came out in 2018, written and directed by Alex Garland, the guy who made Ex Machina, which we've talked about. And Natalie Portman plays the lead, Lena, a biologist and former soldier who joins a mission to uncover what happened to her husband inside Area X, a sinister and mysterious phenomenon that is expanding across the American coastline. Once inside, the expedition discovers a world of mutated landscapes and creatures as dangerous as it is beautiful, and threatens both their lives and their sanity.
It's a great follow-up to Ex Machina for Garland. And it's really a really cool sci-fi film about, like, it's called, so this environment is called the Shimmer. It's pretty much this mutating bubble from outer space that is changing the biology of everything it comes into contact with. And this bubble is growing larger and larger in size across the landscape of the environment. And so there's a huge party of military and scientific personnel who are trying to figure out how to stop it.
Yeah, it's an all-female led cast, basically, of women who go into the Shimmer. You know, Natalie Portman, then you have Jennifer Jason Leigh, Tessa Thompson, who's also in Thor. And this is something that we needed in Hollywood, and something I wanted to see, too, is, you know, flip the genre on its head. Sci-fi action movie, let's get an all-female cast in there, great actresses. Garland knew what he was doing. It's a beautiful movie, excellent CGI, but unfortunately was a box office disappointment. Its budget was about $50 million, $55 million. It only made, I think, $43 million at the box office.
Which is a big loss.
Yeah, but it was also released on Netflix, too, at the same time. So it's one of those...
Was it?
Yeah, it was released, I think, after like a week, they put it on Netflix.
Oh.
Because Netflix got distribution rights to it. So it was one of those things where, like, yeah, I don't think it was a Netflix production yet, though, but I'm sure they paid for the rights.
Yeah.
Maybe it made its budget back, but it was a disappointment. I wish more people would have seen it because it was so good.
Yeah, I mean, this movie, in the marketing and the posters, you got 5 women carrying guns, and it's like, you don't see that very often.
Let's rock and roll. Let's do this.
Exactly. And Natalie Portman is so great. Her character is essentially trying to find out what happened to her husband, because her husband, played by Oscar Isaac's Kane, went on a mission into the Shimmer, and he came back, and he's very strange. He seems very out of sorts and very much unlike himself, and then he's dying physically. And so she joins the party of these women. They're all scientists in some way that have a mission to go into the Shimmer to get to the lighthouse, which is... The lighthouse is where whatever struck the earth and caused the Shimmer, it started at the lighthouse on the edge of this beach.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get to that lighthouse, and they have to travel through this dense area that is within the Shimmer environment, and they slowly discover how the Shimmer has been mutating all of the biology in this environment in both positive and negative ways.
Yeah, it's like on a molecular level, everything is kind of blending together, and you get these animals that are mixed with nature, these like nature flower beings that can walk, and it's really interesting to see. And you get that mutated bear, which is terrifying, but also there are disturbing parts of this film, especially where they find the remains of the body, and then they discover the video footage of Oscar Isaac's crew and what was happening to them. And the thing with the Shimmer is, again, it's changing you on a molecular level, so it's changing the people on a molecular level. It's changing the composition of their brains and how they think, and it's making them anxious and sort of go crazy if they're in it long enough.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like that scene, I don't think we can show it, but
it's pretty disturbing.
It's extremely disturbing, and it's very graphic. But there's a lot of production design in this film that is both beautiful but also disturbing visually. Like the discovery of that body. It's this incredible set piece that it's just disturbing. It makes your stomach turn, but also it's kind of beautiful in a way. You know what I mean?
This movie gets even more intense towards the end in the climax of the film, where Lena eventually makes it to the lighthouse, and you have those crazy, disturbing scenes where she approaches and comes into contact with the actual source of the Shimmer, which we find out is essentially an alien sentient being.
Yeah.
And the Shimmer creates this humanoid form of itself, I think, because Jennifer Jason Leigh's character gets there too, right?
So Jennifer Jason Leigh gets there, but I think she's ultimately destroyed by the being, and then after it destroys Jennifer Jason Leigh, it like absorbs her in some kind of way. And by the way, it's amazing special effects. It's incredible
for the budget.
Yeah, the design they did with it. And then it takes a drop of Lena's blood and creates a duplicate version of her, and there's this amazing scene where the humanoid hasn't formed into an identical copy of her yet. It's a humanoid body, but it's metallic, sleek, and shiny, and very alien looking. But it's copying and mimicking Lena's movements, and it prevents her from trying to get away from it because it can stop her in her tracks because it's doing exactly what she's doing.
It's terrifying. Like, you don't know if it's going to hurt her, but you think it will, but, like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And that's when Lena gives it the grenade, and it doesn't know what the grenade is yet.
Yeah.
And then Lena escapes she blows up the Shimmer, and basically she's, like, walking back in the Shimmer everything is on fire, and we learn that similar to, like, the mimics in Edge of Tomorrow, the Shimmer is connected to everything. It's one being throughout the Shimmer.
Mm-hmm. And then Lena escapes and gets back to the military base, and she learns that Kane, her husband, is making a full recovery and is doing much better from his previous illness, and he was pretty much on his deathbed before, and he started getting better when the Shimmer was destroyed. And then there's that really great ending where even though Kane is healed up, he's still very strange and not himself, and Lena asks him, "Are you Kane? Are you my husband?" And Kane replies, "I don't think so." So this shows us that Kane, the real Kane, died in the lighthouse, and the duplicate, the alien duplicate of Kane, is the one who's in the military base now. He asks Lena the same thing: Is she really Lena? And she doesn't answer. But there's Alex Garland does that great close up of her eyes, and she has that weird hue in her eyes, just like Kane does.
Yeah, so they're hugging and embracing, and
Yeah.
both their eyes start to change colors, kind of evolving.
Yeah.
Which means that they are no longer human anymore.
Yeah, they have the
have the
shimmer.
shimmer inside of them.
Yeah.
It's
Really,
a really cool ending.
yeah, it's a really great ending. I love this movie. I think anyone who hasn't seen it, you should check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. It's super easy to watch. Fantastic sci-fi film.
Yeah. Cool little fun fact, too, is Oscar Isaac was filming this movie at the same time as The Last Jedi in 2017.
Oh, that's why he has the Poe hair.
Yeah, so he has the same hair and facial hair and everything.
Yeah.
And he was filming it on adjacent studio lots. And so he had the same trailer used for both films. And he would often film scenes for both movies on the same day.
That's crazy.
So they're just like, I got to go film a scene over there for Annihilation. All right, I'll see you over there. I got to go back. I got to go be Poe.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I love Oscar Isaac.
Oscar is the man.
Yeah, he's great. But this is a great role from Natalie. She crushes it. I wish more people saw it. Unfortunately, they didn't. But
Hey, watch it right now. Watch it this weekend.
Check it out. Annihilation. You've never seen a sci-fi film like it.
All right, and that ends our episode on Natalie Portman, episode 26 of Rares of a Lost podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in wherever you are. If you're listening on a streaming service or watching on YouTube, definitely subscribe if you're on YouTube. Don't forget to tell your friends. Leave us those 5-star reviews. We're growing word of mouth, like we say, so please tell your friends about us so we can make the show as big as possible and reach as many people as possible.
Thanks for tuning in. We love you.
All right, have a great day.